Hi, I'm Dave Birch. I'm Global Ambassador for Consult Hyperion, which is a secure electronic transactions consultancy.
Dave, talk about the panel discussion that you moderated this morning.
This morning we had a panel on digital identity, looking at some different perspectives. And I would say there were probably three things that came out of it for me. So the first is, maybe you think differently, but I don't think we saw the solution. I don't think we saw the template for the future. And the reason for that is because traditionally most digital identity schemes around the world aren't really digital identity. They're digitized versions of the identity systems that we have offline. And I don't think we've taken on board yet just what new ways of thinking about digital identity we need for an always-on interconnected world. In other words, we haven't yet got the sort of smart identity that we need for that online world. But we heard lots of interesting discussions about where it could come from. The second thing for me really was the role of the banks. We had banks from the US and from South America. And personally, of course, and this is just a personal prejudice, I kind of want banks to provide the solution. I would like my online identity to be managed by a regulated institution that can be held accountable and has fault management, dispute handling, and all these kind of things. So, but I have to say, if banks don't do that, then the problem isn't going to go away. So other people will step up and fill that gap. Facebook and so on. That was the second thing, and then the third thing is probably I was very interested in the discussion about Airbnb and the gig economy and reputational identity. So, and the idea of the discussion is if I want to trust you in a transaction, if I want to do business with you, then your credit rating or your bank identity, may not be the most important factor. And if it turns out that you have a good Airbnb rating, you're a good person, and you're a good Uber driver, or these other kinds of reputations can serve to supplant or even substitute more conventional notions of identity. And those reputational identities, those are identities that are forged in relationships, not in isolation, strike me as being a very interesting area where we could apply some intellectual thinking to. So those are probably the sort of three main ones. And the other thing, of course, was it was a little bit of an experiment for Money 2020. We decided not to have slides. We decided to have on-stage chats between experts who understood these things very well, and I think it worked rather well.
I'm just curious, based on a lot of the conversations that we've been having and hearing since the morning, and also the previous Money 2020, there seems to be a lot of hype. So they're big words. There's blockchain and identity and the GDPR and bank regulators. And do you think there's actually still an understanding of how these solutions can actually have real-life practical applications?
Well, there's different kinds of hype, though, aren't there? I mean, there's hype as in sort of the hype around AI. We all understand. Once you start looking in the sort of 5-year horizons of where many industries are going, not just banking, it's very clear that artificial intelligence is going to be dominant in setting the strategies downstream. And I can give you an obvious reason for that in the case of banking, which is, of course, the customers will have artificial intelligence as well. And so a world in which the bank artificial intelligence is trying to sell a pension scheme to my artificial intelligence, that's a very different world from what we have now. So there's hype, but in time, you know it will be justified. I think that's a little bit different. And then there's hype, which is to do with things like, you mentioned open banking. Well, I don't think that's hype at all. I think open banking is a fundamental reshaping of the financial sector. In different parts of the world, it comes from different heritages. So in the UK, it comes from competition. In Australia, it comes from open data and so on. But nevertheless, it reshapes the sector. It's very important. It's certainly not a technical thing. And then there's hype, which is bordering on the ridiculous, which is things like blockchain and so on, where you hear people saying the strangest things about how the blockchain is going to solve the refugee crisis, manage climate change, get cats out of trees. I mean, anything you can think of. Where I think, and this is going to make me sound horrible, but a lot of the people don't really understand the technology or what it is or why it's interesting. So they may as well be just standing up telling you, well, leprechauns are going to fix. I mean, really, that's what they might as well be saying for the. So I think in those cases, I think we probably need to be a little bit harder on people and get them to justify their position a little more. So, yeah, there's hype, but there's different kinds of hype. Also, the thing is, when you hear hype about Internet of Things, for example, that would be a good example, right? So a lot of the hype sounds ridiculous, but you know that the Internet of Things is going to change the way we work and live. I mean, we know this is going to be true, connecting everything up, especially without any of the security that we need to make it work properly. So, I mean, yes, it's hype, but it's justified to some extent. That's not true in everything that we've heard discussed here.
Just one last question, and this would be more around IoT and the wearable space. I noticed your co-moderator was Bianca Lopes.
Yeah.
So we had last spoken to her in Amsterdam about the wearable space and identity linked to that. I was wondering what your thoughts were about the space.
Well, of course, one of the reasons I like working with Bianca is because it's fun bouncing around different ideas about this. I'm slightly more skeptical about the wearable space because I think that in many applications, biometrics are going to move ahead of this. So you can imagine the sort of situation where you go to a sports stadium and you walk in and the system, checks your face, sees that you have a ticket, checks you against its loyalty scheme or whatever, and lets you through, and the need for the wearable begins to drop away. So, on the other hand, you look at the figures. I think something like a third of Americans already wear smartwatches or Fitbits or things like that. So clearly, people like them in some cases. I just think in the mass market, we're in a situation where there are other technologies, passive biometric technologies, AI, machine learning, location management, which when you put them all together means you don't really need the wearable. I mean, you do for health things. If you're trying to measure your blood pressure and stuff like that. But if you're trying to get into a sports stadium or something, I don't know. I wonder if biometrics aren't going to go faster.
And how are you finding, I know it's only been the first day of Money 2020, but how are you finding the conversations today?
Well, remember, the Sundays are very content heavy. People who come on the Sunday, I mean, it was packed this morning. I was stunned to see how big the audience was. But people who come on the Sundays are coming for the content. I mean, to be trivial, they're not so interested in the hype keynotes from people who are in charge of publicly listed companies and can't really say anything anyway. But it's been a content day, and the content has been great. And so the quality of the discussions has been great too.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.